First of all, you talked in your presentation about blogging and online journalism. I wonder if we could talk about traditional newspapers and how do you see the future of them? How do you think they will evolve?
Well, I don't know about in Romania because I'm not Romanian, but in North America, traditional newspapers have way too much cost. They have these huge editorial teams, these huge news teams doing the same thing at every newspaper, and so that has to change. So you will see newsrooms shrink, but I think you'll always see very strong editorial teams for creating longer articles or opinion pieces or investigative journalism. And I think that's where even the oldest newspapers will always have strength. As long as they can get their costs down, people still want to read that kind of thing. So,
do you think that they will ever disappear completely?
Some will. The ones that can't make that adjustment, that can't, get rid of some of the old costs, some of the old ways, and take advantage of some of the new media, social media kind of things, those ones will have very real challenges. Other ones, like Wall Street Journal, Washington Post, New York Times, the London Times, they've started that transition, and they're doing very, very well at it. They still have all the old costs, because they haven't trimmed their costs yet, but when they do, they'll probably all survive. That doesn't mean that all newspapers will survive, but it means that newspapers can survive if they're able to make that transition.
I understand. You mentioned earlier on the strong points of journalism in comparison with blogging, let's say. Could you name a couple of other ones? Like what are the strong points of journalism in comparison with blogging?
Yeah, I think for me, my personal opinion, it's free and it's worth every penny, right? Is that, real journalism has three jobs. It tells a story, and so that can be a very simple story about, a family that's going through a crisis that a blogger would never talk about, or it can be a very complex story that spans multiple editions and magazines and whatever. It's to provide context because facts are easy. Anyone can find facts these days. Typically faster than you'd find them in a newspaper, people can find facts. And so facts aren't enough, you need to have context. And the third is really digging deep on stories that matter to the people, where bloggers, because we're small and we're very self-interested and we care about ourselves, we won't spend 3 months on a story. And so I think journalists can really, really shine in those three areas: storytelling, context, and very deeply researched pieces.
I understand. You mentioned in your presentation that journalism doesn't require any special skill. That was kind of a controversial, assertion. My question to you is, don't you think that writing a text is a skill and that it improves with time, with practice?
I completely agree. Writing is a skill and writing improves with practice, but that has nothing to do with journalism school. The example I gave during the talk was if you try and perform heart surgery without a medical degree, bad things will happen. If you try and write a book or a magazine article without going to journalism school, nothing bad happens, unless you don't have your facts right or you're not a good writer or whatever. But that has nothing to do with journalism school. Even the best journalists get their facts right or wrong, and they, don't write properly all the time. And so being a good writer is different than being a good journalist. And you could almost say if practice makes you a better writer, then bloggers write more often than journalists anyways. And so they're more likely to be better writers anyways. So.
But don't you think that in college they learn exactly that? I don't know, college means practice for future journalism?
In theory it can. And I'm not saying don't go to journalism school, because the ethics and the traditions and the practices and becoming a better writer are all important. But that doesn't make you a journalist, and that doesn't make you better. That doesn't make your articles of higher quality. I think the big issue is that journalists need to recognize that bloggers bring value, and bloggers need to recognize that journalists bring value. You need both. You can't just survive with one or the other, because everyone can't do everything.
Speaking of which, you said that in 10 years the line between blogging and journalism will disappear. What's going to happen then? What will be the consequences of this disappearance? Journalists will become bloggers, or bloggers will become journalists? What will be the result?
Well, I don't think there's a consequence. I think you'll have people who write for media organizations, and they could be bloggers, which is very much about voice, right? So you're talking very naturally like two friends having a drink, and there'll be journalists writing for those same media organizations, which are those that write in a more structured kind of way, right? But you could also have journalists that write just for themselves, and you could have bloggers that write just for themselves, and you could have journalists that get paid and journalists that don't, and bloggers that get paid and bloggers that don't. And so what that line is, right now the only reason the line exists is because around the world, but especially here in Romania, journalists draw the line and bloggers draw the line because they want to seem special. And there's no reason to, because readers read both. It's not like you're competing for readers, and so why do you need to draw that line?
Okay, one last question. I understand. You said that you made a survey during your presentation. Nobody trusts newspaper 100%, and nobody trusts blogs. Newspapers have lost this chance, to become totally credible. Do blogs have this chance maybe in the future?
No, I mean, the reality is stuff is written by humans, and we make mistakes. I would tend to think if I asked the audience, do people have 50% trust in newspapers or 70% or 90%, and the same question about blogs, they would have more trust in newspapers because there is more process and more structure. But that doesn't mean it's better content, right? And so, yeah, I don't know. I mean, I think we'll have to wait and see. But at the end of the day, it's up to the value readers see. It doesn't matter what journalists think of journalists, or what bloggers think of bloggers, or what bloggers think of journalists. It matters what the audience thinks of the content. And I think you'll find that the audience will, as we say in North America, they'll speak with their feet, right? They will buy or read that which what they find most valuable. And so if in Romania, mainstream media and old newspapers stick around, that's because that's what the audience in Romania wants. And I can't predict that, but I do believe the two will get closer and closer to the same goals.
One final question. I'm going to ask you to make another prediction. How many years will pass before blogs will be as reliable as newspapers? And what will it take, for big names in blogging to become known all over the world, maybe?
Well, I think there's three kinds of blogging, and that's probably where some of the confusion in the session was. There's personal blogging, which is, hey, I ate my cat for lunch, right? Or, my cat had went to the bathroom, or I bought a new pair of shoes, right? And then there's professional blogging, which is talking about things that are your profession. So if you're an artist, that's talking about your art. If you're a lawyer, that's talking about the law. If you're, whatever, that's kind of professional kind of blogging, right? And some people make money from that and some people don't. And then there's citizen journalism, which is different. And that's where people who used to be the audience are now creating the news using the tools that only journalists used to have access to. I think that's where the line starts to blur, and that's where it gets really interesting, because you don't have to say, I'm a journalist because I work at Journal National, is that the big national journal or whatever? You can say, I'm a journalist because I wrote this piece that investigates corruption or something. So,
I understand. Thank you very much, Jeremy.